In this video, we will show how to do the questions in Module 2 of the math portion of the SAT practice test number 10, published by the College Board. You can find the questions in this video by finding the practice test online. The test is published by the College Board, and you can search SAT practice test. This is the paper practice test on College Board in any internet browser, and get to that website. Also, you can go directly to that website if you type in what you see on the screen. A link to this will also be in the description of this video. If you go to that website, you'll get to this, and the practice test is in bundle 10. The practice test is right here, and you can also find answers and written explanations to those questions in this same bundle. Some of the written explanations may be slightly different than the ones that I show in this video. Once you download the SAT practice test, it will look like this. It starts out with a reading and writing module, a couple of them actually, and then it has the math modules. Module 1 of the math starts on page 30. In this video, we're going to start on Module 2, which is right here starting on page 42. Module 2 begins on page 42, and it has a formula and a fact sheet as its first page. The second page describes how to write the answers, and then the questions start. So let's go ahead and do these questions. Here we go. Question 1. An object's speed is 64 yards per second. What is the object's speed in feet per second? So what we do is think of 64 yards per second. We want to create something in feet per second. So we're going to multiply times a fraction, which is 1, which has feet over yards. And since we want it to be 1, we want to use the fact that 3 feet is 1 yard. So basically 64 times 3 over 1. The yards will cancel out and the feet will be left. And we'll get 192 feet per second. And so the answer to this question, question number 1, is 192, which is answer D. Question 2. The scatter plot shows the relationship between two variables x and y. A line of best fit is also shown. Which of the following equations best represents the line of best fit shown? So the first thing I have to do is notice that this line should have a positive slope, because as we move from left to right, we're going up. So it's going to have a positive slope. That means options for my line are going to be either A or B. I'm thinking of this line as y equals mx plus b, that's slope-intercept form. So the m has to be positive. So I've eliminated C and D already. The other thing is that notice the y-intercept looks like it's 0 and then a positive 3.4. So the y-intercept is 0, positive 3.4. Now, I might not be able to see that it's perfectly 3.4, but those are my options. It's either positive 3.4 or negative 3.4. So this is positive 3.4. And the same way, I see a positive slope, and the only two options for slope are 1 and negative 1. So we get y equals 1x plus 3.4 as the equation of the line. So positive slope, and the only option for a positive slope is a 1. The y-intercept is obviously a little bit above 3, and the only option we have is 3.4. So y equals x plus 3.4 is the final answer there, and that is A. So A is the answer to question 2. Question 3. The graph shows the linear relationship between x and y. Which table gives 3 values of x and their corresponding values of y for this relationship? So I'm going to do this a little bit different. Notice that the x values in each of these tables are 0, 1, and 2. And so I'm just going to look at what is the point that the line goes through when x is 0, when x is 1, and when x is 2. So these 3 points are highlighted already. You can hopefully see that when x is 0, the corresponding point is 0, negative 5. So we're going through 0, negative 5. When x is 1, the corresponding y value is negative 3. So we get 0, negative 3 as another point. And when x is 2, we can see that we're going through a y value of negative 1. So 0, negative 5, 0, negative 3, 2, negative 1. Those are 3 points. So I look at my options, and the option that has those 3 points is table D. So table D is the correct answer for question number 3. Question 4. What is the perimeter in inches of a rectangle with a length of 4 inches and a width of 9 inches? So the perimeter of a rectangle goes around the rectangle. We hit the length twice, so twice the length, and we hit the width twice, twice the width. So all we have to do is say length is 4 inches, width is 9 inches. That's going to be 2 times 4 is 8, plus 2 times 9 is 18. So 8 plus 18 gives me 26. And so the perimeter is 26 or 26 inches, which obviously is option D. So the answer to question 4 is D, 26. Question 5. The given equation relates the positive numbers m, n, and p. Which equation correctly gives m in terms of n and p? So the only thing we're doing here is solving for m. So gives m in terms of n and p just means solve for m. And actually, it's almost already solved for us. All we have to do is divide both sides by 7. If I divide both sides by 7, I can write this in a number of different ways, but 2 times n plus p, all divided by 7, would be that equation solved for m. And so we can see in number 5 that the answer is A. So the answer to question 5 is A. Question 6. What is the median of the data shown? Well, the median is going to be the middle number numerically. And luckily enough for us, we have all of our numbers in order from least to greatest. So if we look at the order of these numbers, it does go from least to greatest. Now you just count how many numbers there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 numbers. So we have 9 numbers. And the middle number will be the 5th in line. So the middle number is the 5th one. Therefore, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is 79. That means there's 4 below 79, 4 numbers above 79. So 79 is the median. And that's the answer. We just type in 79 as the final answer. Question 7. The function f is defined by f of x is equal to 4x. For what value of x does f of x equals 8? So we have 4x as the output, and we're saying when does the output equal 8? For what value of x does the output equal 8? So we set 4x equal to 8 and then solve. Dividing both sides by 4 gives me an x of 2. So x equals 2 is the answer to question 7. Question 8. Of the 300,000 paper clips, 234,000 are large size, or size large. What percentage of paper clips are size large? So what you would do here, in order to find the percent, you take that 234,000 number, that's your number which are size large, divide it by the total number of paper clips, which is 300,000. If you did that, you would get 0.78. Now, 0.78 is not 0.78%. We move that decimal place over 2 spots, or you could think of it as multiplying by 200, because that's like 78 out of 100. 0.78 is 78 out of 100, which is 78%. So 78% is the correct answer. And that means the answer to question 8 is D. Question 9. The function f gives the estimated height in feet of a willow tree x years after its height was first measured. What statement is the best interpretation of 4 in this context? Well, x is going to be the number of years, f is going to be the height. X equals number of years. And the best thing I know how to think of is to say, well, if we plugged in 0, the 8x would go away and we'd just be left with 4. So what that means is that initially, when this tree was first measured, it was 4 feet in height. So it was 4 foot tall when first measured. So if you look at the different statements here in 9, D would be the best option. The estimated height of the tree was 4 feet when it was first measured. So D is our best option. That's our answer to question number 9. Question 10. The graphs of the given equations in the xy plane intersect at point x comma y. What is a possible value of x? Let me start it down here. So we have y equals 76 and y equals x squared minus 5. Basically what I would do is I would do substitution, substitute 76 in for the y value in the second equation. That would give 76 is equal to x squared minus 5. Again, I'm using substitution here. Add 5 to both sides. That would give me 81 is equal to x squared. And then solving this, that forces either x to be a positive 9 or x to be a negative 9. And we look for those two options, either of those two options in our options. And therefore, B is the correct answer to question 10. So B is the correct answer. X could be negative 9. Now, the other way you could have tried to solve this is to, plug in those numbers into your equation here and see which one of those gives you a y value of 76. But I use solving techniques. Each side, question 11. Each side of an equilateral triangle S is multiplied by a scale factor of k to create an equilateral triangle T. The length of each side of the triangle T is greater than the length of each side of the triangle S. Which of the following could be a value of k? Now in this one, just draw a picture or a couple of pictures. It doesn't matter of triangles. Equilateral S is multiplied by a scale factor to create an equilateral triangle of T. T is greater, is a bigger triangle than S. So what could be the value of K? Again, just look at a picture and do this. I'll post a picture in here. So there you go. So if the side of S needs to be multiplied to give us the side of T, then the multiplication factor needs to be bigger than 1. So the K needs to be greater than 1. And therefore, our only option that it could be is A, which is 29 over 28. All of the other factors are smaller or 1 or smaller. So the only option is A, which is 29 over 28. That's the only value which is bigger than 1. So A is the answer to question 11. Question 12. How many solutions does the given equation have? We have 66x is equal to 66x. If you divided both sides by 66, you'd get x is equal to x. And you ask, well, what numbers can I plug in to make that true? And the answer is any real number I can plug in, and that would be true. So what we get is a solution which is either all real numbers or infinitely many solutions. So How many solutions does the equation have? Since all real numbers work, we get infinitely many solutions. And therefore, C is the correct answer to question 12. So C is the correct answer to question 12. Question 13. Vivian bought party hats and cupcakes for $71. Each package of hats costs $3 and each cupcake costs $1. If Vivian bought 10 packages of party hats, how many cupcakes did she buy? I'm going to write the money equation. $3 per package of hats plus $1 per cupcake is the total cost on hats and cupcakes. And she bought $71 worth of hats and cupcakes. Now she says, or it says that she bought 10 packages of hats. So 3 times 10 packages of hats plus $1 per cupcake equals 71. I can just solve this. That would be 30 plus C equals 71. Subtracting 30 from both sides would give me that the number of cupcakes Vivian bought is 41. So 41 is the correct answer to question 13. Question 14. The exponential function g is defined by g of x is equal to 19 times a to the x power, where a is a positive constant. If g of 3 is equal to 2375, what is the value of g of 4? So g of 3 is equal to 2375. That means 2375 is what we get out when when we have 19 times a raised to the third power. So I need to solve this equation. Dividing both sides by 19 would give me 125 is equal to a raised to the third power. I could take a 1/3 power to both sides or a cube root to both sides, but in either case, I get a is 5. So now I know that my function g of x looks like 19 times 5 raised to the x power. And so when it asks me for the value of g of 4, all I can do, or all I should do, is take 19 times 5 raised to the 4th power. Make sure you raise it to the 4th power first. When you do that, and then multiply times 19 afterwards, when you do that, you get 11,875. So 11,875 is the answer to question 14. Question 15. In a right triangle RST, the sum of the measures of angle R and S is 90 degrees. The value of sine of R is root 15 over 4. What is the value of cosine of S? Now, if it says the sum of R and S is 90 degrees and we have a right triangle, that means the T is the right angle. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw a picture where T is the right angle, and then I'll talk about, and then I'll label the sides as A, B, and C, legs of the right triangle and the hypotenuse. I'll dump that right here. So there we go. Here's our right triangle drawn with right angle of T, R, and S are the other angles. And then the legs of the right triangle we'll call A, B, and then the hypotenuse of the right triangle we'll call C. That's the traditional labeling of that right triangle. Now, in order to know what's going on here, the thing we want to remember is the mnemonic SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA says that sine is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, cosine is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is equal to opposite over adjacent in a right triangle. So in a right triangle, SOHCAHTOA works. Now, it says here that sine of R is equal to 15 over square root of 15 over 4. I'm going to put the square root of 15 over 4 on the left-hand side because I want to point something out about what sine of R is. Sine of R is this angle here, is going to be opposite, the side opposite of it, divided by the hypotenuse. So it's going to be the ratio B over C in SOHCAHTOA. So opposite over hypotenuse. Now, what is cosine of S? Well, cosine of S is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. The side adjacent to S is the B, and the hypotenuse is the C. Notice that that's the same as sine of R. And so cosine of S and sine of R are going to be the same value, which means that cosine of X is going to be the square root of 15 divided by 4. And therefore, we get B as the correct answer to question 15. So B is the correct answer. Question 16. The graph shows the relationship between the number of shares of stock from a company A, X, and the number of shares of stock from company B, Y, that Simone can purchase. Which equation could represent this relationship? Now, this one gives me equations of all different forms. So what I would do is I would just notice that for company A, we could purchase 60 shares of company A stock if we purchase 0 shares of company B. So in other words, this line goes through the point 60, 0. And in the same vein, this line also goes through the point 040. So we could purchase 40 shares of company B stock if we purchased 0 shares of company A stock. So what I would do is I would just see which one of these lines goes through both of these 2 points. And if you look at, for instance, line A and plug in 60, 0, then you would get 0 is equal to 8 times 60 plus 12. That's obviously going to be false. We do not get 0 equals 0. If you look at option B, well, when you take 8 times 60, whoops, plus 12 times 0, do you get 480? yes, that's true when you do the multiplication. And then if you take 8 times 0 plus 12 times 40, do you again get 480? And it turns out, yes, you do. That's true. So since the line for option B goes through both of those points, I could stop right now and I'd say B is actually the answer to this question, question 16. If you want to be really thorough, you can do the same calculations for C as well. Plug in 60, 0 into C. You'd get 0 is equal to 12 times 60 plus 8. That's false. You don't get 0 over 0 there. And plug in 60, 0 into D. 12 times 60 plus 8 times 0 equals 480. If you do that calculation, you'll see that that's false as well. So B is the correct answer. That's the only one that gives you, that you can see, that goes through the points 60, 0 and 0, 40. In fact, it's the only one that actually goes through 60, 0. So B is the correct answer. Question 17. Which expression is equivalent to the following? 8x times the quantity x minus 7 minus 3 times the quantity x minus 7. What I would do, all divided by 2x minus 14. And it says where x is greater than 7 because we don't want to be dividing by 0. So we have 8x times the quantity x minus 7 minus 3 times the quantity x minus 7 over 2x minus 14. Now, because I see that we have this expression x minus 7 that's been factored on top, I'm going to do that same thing on bottom. I'm going to factor out a greatest common factor of 2, and sure enough, in parentheses, I'm left with x minus 7. So what I can do is I can divide both of these. I can basically factor out an x minus 7 on the top. There's a number of ways to see this. I'm going to, because of the way I'm doing this, write it this way. It's like 8x minus 3 times the quantity x minus 7 divided by 2 times x minus 7. That's one way to see it. You can also just see it as divide the first part by x minus 7, divide the second part by x minus 7. And whichever way you see it, you get 8x minus 3 on top and a 2 on the bottom. So whatever way you see it, the x minus 7s cancel out, divide by that number on both terms, and we end up with 8x minus 3 divided by 2, which is option B. So B is the correct answer to question 17. Question 18. The function f is defined by -8, f of x equals -8 times 2 raised to the x power plus 22. What is the y-intercept of the graph in the xy plane? So y-intercept is what we get when we plug in x equals 0. It's where our graph hits the y-axis. So we hit the y-axis when x is 0. And all we have to do is plug in 0 into our function and see what happens. We'd end up with -8 times 2 raised to the 0th power plus 22. And now all I have to do is order of operations. We'd get -8 times 1 plus 22. That's just negative 8 plus 22, which is equal to, excuse me, 14. So that means the y-intercept has x value of 0 and y value of 14. So the y-intercept is 0, 14, and therefore the answer to question 18 is A. Question 19. Keenan made 32 cups of vegetable broth. Keenan then filled X small jars and Y large jars with all of the vegetable broth he made. The equation 3x plus 5y equals 32 represents this situation. Which is the best interpretation of 5y in this context? So what it's looking like is that y is the number of large jars. So y equals number of large jars. And because it has a coefficient of 5, this looks like it's tracking the number of cups of vegetable broth. So it looks like there's 5 cups per large jar. So 5 equals the number of cups per large jar. So what would 5y be? Well, 5y, we take the number of cups per large jar times the number of large jars. That would be the total number of cups of vegetable broth in the large jars. So the total cups of broth that are in all the large jars. And therefore, the answer to question 19 is C. The best interpretation would be C, the total number of cups of vegetable broth in the large jars. Question 20. A circle in the xy plane has diameter with endpoints of 2, 4 and 2, 14. The equation of the circle is x minus 2 squared plus y minus 9 squared equals r squared, where r is a positive constant. What is the value of r? If you know anything about circles here, r is actually the radius of the circle. And if you know the standard equation of a circle, the center of that circle is at 2, 9. You can find that in a couple of different ways through the equation, or you could have just found the midpoint between 2, 4 and 2, 14. So if we want to find the radius, there's actually 2 different ways to do this. We could find the distance between the endpoints in order to find the diameter. So the diameter, since the endpoints of the diameter have the same x value, the diameter is just going to be the difference in the y values. So that's just 10. So that's one way to do it. Or you could find the radius directly by finding the distance between one of these points and the center. So the distance from 2, 4 to 2, 9, again, same x value. So the distance is just the difference in the y values, which is 5. Or 2, 14 to 2, 9, again, difference in y values is 5. You could have also found that the radius is 5 by saying the diameter is twice the radius, and then doing that calculation as well. Since the diameter we know is 10, therefore the radius has to be 5. So either way, we get a radius of 5, and the value of r, therefore, is 5. And that's the answer to question 20. Question 21. Line L is defined by 3y plus 12x is equal to 5. Line N is perpendicular to line L. What is the slope of line N? The first thing I want to do is deal with line L. And I'm going to rewrite that so I can more easily see the slope. I'm going to write that in slope-intercept form. In order to do that, I will subtract 12x from both sides, giving me 3y is equal to negative 12x plus 5. And then I divide everything by a 3. That would give me y is equal to negative 4x plus 5/3. So the slope of line L is negative 4. Line N is perpendicular to line L. The slope of a perpendicular line is the negative reciprocal of the other line. So we're looking for the negative reciprocal of, I should say, slope of L. So I'm looking for the negative reciprocal of negative 4. And that will give me the slope of line N. Well, if you think about the negative reciprocal, 4 is like a 4 over 1. The reciprocal of negative 4 is negative 1/4. If I take the negative of the reciprocal, so that's the opposite of negative 1/4, I get a positive 1/4. So 1/4 is the answer to question 21. The slope of N is going to be 1/4. The slope of line N is 1/4. And that's, we can stop here. But again, the key thing there, perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals. Question 22. What is the sum of the solutions to the given equation? So we have opposite of 5x plus 13, all inside an absolute value, is equal to 73. So if we know anything about absolute value, that means this negative 5x plus 13 could have been a positive 73, or negative 5x plus 13 could have been a negative 73. And so it's our job to solve for each of these. Absolute value makes negative things positive. So if the thing inside here was a negative 73, absolute value, that would be positive 73. If the thing inside here was a 73, absolute value of that would be a positive 73 as well. So let's solve both of these. In this first equation, we'd get negative 5x. We'd subtract 13 from both sides. We'd get negative 5x is equal to 60. In the second equation, when you subtract 13 from both sides, you get negative 5x is equal to negative 86. And then you would divide both sides by a -5 in both cases. So in this first case, we get x is equal to -12. That's what happens when you take 60 divided by -5. When you take a -86 and divide it by -5, you get an x of 17.2. Now, this asks me for the sum of the solutions. So the sum is going to be equal to -12 plus 17.2, which is equal to 5.2. So 5.2 should be the answer, but all of our answers are in fraction form. And so what we would like to do is rewrite 5.2 as a fraction. You can do that pretty easily. We're doing 0.2, so 52 over 10, which is divide both sides, or excuse me, both the numerator and denominator by 2. That's 26 over 5. So you can do that by hand. You can also use your calculator to convert to a fraction as well. But 26 over 5 is the answer, and therefore D is the answer to question 22. By the way, earlier I could have left the 17.2 as a fraction as well, but I didn't, obviously. Question 23. For the exponential function f, the value f of 1 is k, where k is a constant. Which of the following equivalent forms of the function f shows the value of k as a coefficient or the base? So basically, hopefully we know base is not going to make any sense. All right, so we're looking for a k as a coefficient. We're looking for f of 1 to be equal to k. But we know that any exponential function we have is going to look like a times b to some power. And if I want this k to be the coefficient, oops, I want it to look like k times b to a power. Well, if I want to be able to plug in 1 and get a k, I want it to be so that when I take a base to this power, when this x value is 1, I want the power to be 0. If I make my exponent x minus 1, then what will happen is when I plug in 1, I'll get k times b to the 0, and therefore we'll get what we want. And my k is a coefficient, and we're all set. So I want this form. I want k times b to the x minus 1. And that will put my k as a coefficient, and that's what I want. So I look up in my options, and the only option that matches having an x minus 1 in the exponent is C. F of x is equal to 128 times 1.6 raised to the x minus 1 power. And that is going to be such that f of 1 is a constant. That constant in this case happens to be 128. So that gives me the k as a coefficient. We can't have k as the base, but there you go. Question 24. In the given equation, C is a constant. the equation has exactly one solution. What is the value of C? So if this equation has exactly one solution, well, we can solve this in a couple of different ways. One of the ways I like to solve this is to say that since we have one solution, let's think of what the general solutions are. We can use the quadratic formula to give us our general solutions. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, whenever this thing underneath the square root is either a positive number or a negative number, then the plus and minus will take over and I'll be left with two solutions. The only time I end up with one solution is if b squared more minus 4ac is equal to 0. So one solution when b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0. By the way, this is not the only way you could solve this, but this is one of the quicker ways you can solve this. You can also do a completing the square on the left-hand side. I won't do that in this case. But one solution when b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0. Now, by b, we're talking about the coefficient of the x term. By a, we're talking about the coefficient of the x squared term. And c is that constant. So what we have in our case, we know b is 30. We know a is -9. And we're trying to find the c value that will make that equation equal to 0. So we can do that. 30 squared is 900. Minus 4 times -9 is going to give me a plus 36c is equal to 0. So we can solve this equation for c. Let me just do two more steps. So 900 is equal to -36c when I subtract 36c from both sides. And then when I divide 900 by a -36, I end up getting a -25 as my c value. So -25 is the value of c that I want. So -25 is the correct answer. And that's option C. So option C, -25, is the answer to question 24. Question 25. Which of the following expressions has a factor of x plus 2b, where b is a positive integer constant? So what we're going to do is think of factoring this, each of these things. In fact, I want us to notice that 3x squared is always the lead term. 14b is always the second term. So we're trying to factor because I want one of the factors to be x plus 2b. That forces the other factor to be 3x plus 7. Now, why is that? Because the lead term is 3x squared. So in order to get 3x times x, in order to get 3x squared, I need to take 3x times x. The last term is 14b. In order to get that, I need to take 7 times 2b. So I need 3x plus 7 as the first factor if I want x plus 2b as the second factor. Now, if you multiply that out, you indeed get 3x squared, but then you also get 6bx plus 7x plus 14b. So we're asking essentially which one of these middle terms would work for 6b plus 7. So 6b plus 7 is the middle coefficient. So there we go. And the other thing is b is a positive integer. So let's imagine that 7 is my option. If 7 is the middle coefficient, then 7 would have to be equal to 6b plus 7, and then therefore b would have had to have been 0. Subtract 7 from both sides, divide by 6, b would have had to have been 0. That is not a positive integer. So that's not going to work. And then we do the same thing for 28. If 28 is equal to 6b plus 7, subtract 7 from both sides and then divide by 6. Subtracting 7 would give you 21. Dividing by 6 would give you 21 over 6 as your b. That's not an integer. You could take out a common factor of 3. You'd end up with 7 over 2. That's not a positive integer, not an integer. Okay, and then you do the same thing for 42. 42 set equal to 6b plus 7. When you subtract 7 from both sides, you get 35. Divide by 6. You'd end up with 35 over 6. 35 over 6 is not an integer either. And then what you would do is 49. Last 49 equals 6b plus 7. If you do that, subtracting 7 would give you 42, divided by 6 would give you 7. You get b equals 7. That is a positive integer. And therefore, the only option that's going to work is D. So D is the only option that's going to work because 49 is the only middle term that can be written as 6b plus 7, where b is a positive integer. So D is the answer to question 25. Question 26. Two data sets of 23 integers each are summarized in the histograms shown. For each of the histograms, the first interval represents the frequency of integers greater than or equal to 8, but less than 20. The second interval represents the number of integers greater than or equal to 20, but less than 30, and so on and so forth. What is the smallest possible difference between the mean of the data set A and the mean of the data set B? So we're looking for the smallest possible difference. And you can see that the size of these bars are the same, but just shifted over one category. But remember, each of these categories stands for all numbers between 20 and 30, or from 20 to less than 30, from 30 to less than 40, and so on and so forth. So if you think about the smallest possible difference, data set A is going to have a larger average, but each number in data set A could be right at 20, right at 30, right at 40, right at 50 for each of these bars. So in other words, it says from 20 to 30, we have 3 occurrences. So we could, in data set A, we could have a mean, which is 20 occurring 3 times, plus 30 occurring 4 times, plus 40 occurring 7 times, and 60 occurring 9 times. And if you take a sum of 3 plus 4 plus 7 plus 9, that'll give you 23 total values in the data set. Set B, well, at its highest, if you think about the highest number in this 10 to 20 category, it could be 19. So for data set B, we could get 19 3 times, plus 29 4 times, plus 39 7 times, plus 49 9 times. Over 23. Now you could calculate each of these means if you wanted, but what's quicker is to notice that each number in data set A is only 1 higher than each number in data set B, each corresponding numbers. So the 20, 20, 20, we get 19, 19, 19. 30, 30, 30, 30, we get 29, 29, 29, 29, and so on and so forth. So the smallest difference is going to be 1. Since we are talking about integers, I didn't emphasize that enough. The reason I'm using 19 is because they have to be integer numbers. 20s, 19s, we can't use 19.3 or some 19.7. So smallest difference can be 1, and that is option B. Again, if you wanted to calculate the mean from data set A and data set B, that's how you'd calculate it. And you could actually come up with a number. It's not a really nice, pretty number, but you could come up with a rounded number. So this would be about 43.48. And this one is about 42.48. So if you wanted to calculate, that's fine. But this one, it goes a little bit quicker if you just think logically and say, well, these can be at most 1. Each number can be most 1 off. So the smallest difference of the mean can be 1. And therefore, answer B is the correct answer. 1 difference as the smallest. Question 27. The perimeter of an equilateral triangle is 624 centimeters. The height of the triangle is k times the square root of 3 centimeters, where k is a constant. What is the value of k? So this is one where I like to draw what's going on. But before I do that, since the perimeter is 624, since equilateral triangle means all sides are the same, that means each side is going to be length 208. That's 624 divided by 3. So each side is length 208, and then we'll use that in my drawing. So I'm going to draw that. and then dump it into this Word document here. So there it is. Now I've already drawn the height and then labeled some things. The height of an equilateral triangle obviously is going to go down here, hit the base here at a 90-degree angle, splitting our equilateral triangle into two right triangles. Because it's equilateral, all the angle size are the same measures. So we have 60 and 60 and 60 because that's 1/3 of 180. And because we split this angle up here into two evenly, because we have an equilateral triangle, both these right triangles that we draw are going to be 30, 60, 90 right triangles. Moreover, the base is going to be split into halves. So if each side is 208, then the two bases are going to be 104 and 104, half of 208. Now, the height is what we're looking for. You can find that using the Pythagorean theorem if you want. You can say that Pythagorean theorem, remember, is a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. That's in the formula sheet at the beginning of the module. The bases, the a and the b in this case on this right triangle would be 104 and h, and the hypotenuse would be 208. I'm looking at the right triangle here. Whoops. That right triangle. So that right triangle has one base of 104, one base of h, and hypotenuse of 208. So what we can do is say, take 104 squared plus my height squared, whoops, is equal to 208 squared. And so my h squared is going to be 208 squared minus 104 squared. By the way, just make sure you square things before you subtract. What we end up with is an h squared of 32,448. So h is going to be the square root of that thing, positive square root of 32,448. Now notice we're going to be able to write this as k times the square root of 3. So I'm going to think of writing that 32,448 as 3 times something. So that's going to be 10,816 multiplied times 3. And it turns out that 10,816 has a nice square root. It's a perfect square. The square root of 10,816 is 104. So we get 104 times the square root of 3. And therefore, that's the height of that equilateral triangle. And therefore, k is equal to 104. So that's solving via the Pythagorean theorem and splitting up my equilateral triangle into these two right triangles based on the height. The other thing we could have done is notice that we have these special right triangles. Notice that the Pythagorean theorem, I never used the fact that it was 30, 60, 90. But in my formula sheet on the first page of the module, we have these special right triangles. And if I was able to notice that this was a 30, 60, 90, then I could see that this leg is going to be x times square root of 3 when this other leg is x. So if you wanted to, you could have also said, well, this leg is X, that's the 104. The other leg, therefore, has to be 104 times square root of 3. So if X equals 104, by the way, it has to be the leg opposite the 30 degrees, if we notice that. So the leg opposite of 30 degrees is your X. The leg opposite of your 60 degrees would be your X times square root of 3. That would be essentially your height in this case, what I called the height. And so if X is 104, then the height is 104 times the square root of 3. And therefore K is 104 again. So if you want to do this via Pythagorean theorem, you could. If you did notice that that was that special right triangle case where X is a side opposite of 30 degrees, X times root 3 is a side opposite of 60, we could have gotten 104 that way as well. But in either case, 104 is the answer, whether you use the Pythagorean theorem or the special right triangles. So 104 is the answer to question 27. That concludes Module 2 of the SAT practice test number 10. There's a link to the explanation of solutions to the other module, the other math module of this practice test in the description of this video. So Module 1 will be linked to the description in this video. There'll also be a link to a playlist with every SAT practice test published by the College Board. So all of the math portions of the SAT practice tests published by the College Board will be linked in this video. A playlist of all of those will be linked in this video. And then lastly, if you are planning on taking the SAT soon, good luck. I hope this video helps you out.